Well, the first thing I can say is there's safely not going to be any new paradigms here at all. But what I can say is I thought I worked quite fast before. And having worked in a startup for 18 months now, I can tell you I work a lot fucking faster than I did before. And it is partly because, that's what clients expect of agencies. It's also what clients expect of startups. But it is also what, how we win. So by the time WPP has actually managed to kind of pull together an entire army of people, we'll already have done a guerrilla raid and got out there, got in and done it. So that is absolutely at the core of kind of what we do. So I'm literally going to give you 7 of the things that I've kind of done over the last 18 months, which meant that I still got some sleep, and that's pretty much as it goes, really. So I guess the kind of first and important thing is that we always talk about having a really clear kind of shared point of view on the world. I think lots of people talk about having a shared strategic context, and there's actually a guy who he was a fighter pilot in the US and was a fighter pilot in World War II, Vietnam, Korea. And he's known as 42nd Boyd because he could figure out how to outmaneuver any opponent in 40 seconds. And the way he did that is kind of say, well, actually what you need to have is a really clear shared view of kind of, this is what I'm going to do every time I approach a problem, and everybody knows how I'm going to do that, but my opponent doesn't. Everyone on my team knows how I do that. So it's a kind of pretty obvious thing, but what I think makes us a load quicker is that we all know, so it can't just be shared fast strategy, it has to be shared fast everything. We know who we want to work with, what viewpoint they have to have on the world, what we think good work looks like and what good strategy looks like right from the get-go. So that means you can make way faster decisions. And I think one of the things we've always talked about, this will be a familiar quote to anyone from Grey, I'm not interested in stories about the past or any crap of that kind because the woods are burning, you understand. There's a big blaze going on all around. And that feels really true to us, that in the world, whether it's politically, environmentally, whether it's in our industry, it constantly feels like there is a big blaze going on around. And actually, we don't want to work with any clients who don't also feel like that. Because for us, that is super motivating, and it means we get to do stuff that's different, and we get to change things, and that's what we like doing. So, if we share that with a client in the very first meeting, and they don't kind of go, yeah, I feel like that, then we're kind of like, okay, this is not going to work, let's just move on. So that's a very fast one for us. We talk about the fact that people wouldn't care if 3/4 of brands disappeared tomorrow. That's Havas research, actually. Head of sustainability at IKEA talked about the fact we have reached peak stuff in the West. And importantly, I think in our industry, people are paying good money to avoid what we spend our lives making, which could make us all feel slightly suicidal. But equally, we look at that and go, well, okay, we have to be up, and our clients have to be up for things that don't look like traditional advertising any longer. So again, if people don't buy into all of that, we have a really clear kind of point of view of we're not going to work with them. And they probably won't like working with us either. So for us, it's really simple. We kind of think that despite all that doom and gloom, there are brands out there who can make a difference like never before. They're the ones that matter, and they're the brands that people in the real world are glad exist. And that is what we're aiming for with every single brand we work on. It's not necessarily, they don't have to be that when they come in the door, but they have to want to do that. So that's a really useful filter for us in terms of what good strategy looks like, good clients look like, good work looks like. And importantly, they have to kind of buy into that, because we will either do that, work with clients, or we'll create some of them ourselves. And so quick shout out, if anyone likes sustainable coffee, go to halo.coffee, which is one of our brands. So really important for us, that's the filter for everything, and that's been behind all the kind of work we've done, whatever sector it's in. So that's the first thing, because that gets rid of half the stuff, or probably about 7/8 of the stuff that I might waste my day doing otherwise. And the next thing that I will do when I'm approaching project is always write down my first impressions of something. So I am a kind of big fan of that, listen to your gut. I don't believe in that thing of I'm going to do loads and loads of research to figure out what I think. I always start with that's what I think, and I'm either going to disprove or prove that it's right or wrong. So for me, it's always really important just to bung it down on Post-its, and I literally do try and bung it down physically. And that's so important, because otherwise you end up down a rabbit hole and you sort of suddenly remember, and if you've got it there, you go back to it and think, oh yeah, that's right. And actually often that is the way normal people, i.e. not industry people, think about a category. So that's always the first thing I'll do once we've decided it's a good project and it's the right thing to do. The next thing I'll do is actually spend a bit of time thinking about, okay, so that's my first impressions. What do I think the real question here is? And I know it's almost an unforgivable planning cliche to have an Einstein quote, so I had to do it anyway. But I love this quote. I think it's absolutely bang on. If I had an hour to solve a problem and my life depended on it, I would spend the first 55 minutes determining the proper question to ask. So I think we waste a huge amount of our time in planning and in strategy by not interrogating what the right question is up front. And that would be my second kind of bit of advice. And within that, one of the cornerstones of making sure you're asking the right question is following the money and really being quite brutal about, is that going to make my client more money or not at some level? Because I think all too often we spend our time down here dancing and cycling around, I don't know, whether it's a pre-test or a piece of qual or whatever it might be, and actually you can spend months down there, and if you haven't actually spent the time thinking what's the business problem and what's the human problem I'm answering, then you've really wasted your time. So a lot of our approach is to be, I guess, quite brutally efficient in terms of where we spend our time. I'm not sure I'm any faster than anyone else. I'm just quite brutal in what I will and won't do in terms of my time. So, done that, put my first impressions down, and then kind of had a go at thinking about what the real problem is. Doctors quite often talk, and we're in a doctor's operations kind of theme tonight, clearly. They talk about the difference between presenting symptoms and underlying causes. And for me, it is spend your time on the underlying causes. But the next thing I will then go and do is pretty much on any pitch, on any new subject, I cheat. I will go and find somebody who already knows loads and loads about this sector. I'm not going to spend the time trying to get up to speed when I could call somebody who really knows what they're talking about. So I absolutely religiously keep a little black book of people who are, whether it's city analysts who can tell me what the city think about a business, whether it's journalists who are sector experts on it, whether it's actually a freelance planner who's worked on that sector before, whether it's somebody who's written books on it, whatever it is, I will always do that, because it's just like, why wouldn't you? So that is my next bit of advice, cheat where you can. And then I suspect that, I don't know, how many people are there who've had babies here? A few, hooray! Planners do procreate after all. Anyway, one of the things that you also learn quite early, there's a really nerve-wracking moment when you have a baby where they do something called the Apgar Test. And they do various different checks on your baby to see whether or not it's healthy and its reflexes are working. And so for me, having a checklist so I can very quickly diagnose, have I done all the stuff I'm supposed to be doing or not, is really, really useful. And so Apgar Test checklists absolutely save my life on a daily basis. As most people will know, I'm super disorganized, so I do kind of need to have a proper list of stuff. So one of the things we did when we set up, I think we had about, well, I had a year out, but in the month I was allowed to do stuff between being released from my WPP contract and setting up. We literally bashed out an operating system. And so it has got all the questions we think we need to answer to get to a really robust strategy, starting from the inside out, figuring out, you know, what problem are you fixing in the world, who are you for, all of that stuff, what are your flaws that you're going to embrace or ignore, what things aren't you going to do, what actually you're going to do in terms of the customer journey, because fundamentally we believe people are on their own journeys, not a customer journey. So I think we start in different places than a lot of other agencies. So it's having a really good kind of checklist that's going to point you in different directions quite fast. And then again, I mean, it's the cheap thing. I have a Rolodex of what I'd call models of planning, which I will literally kind of go, oh, does this fit that situation or doesn't it? Is it going to help me answering that question? And I've probably got a keynote deck with probably like 100 different planning frameworks on it, and I will just, you know, pick and choose the one and cycle through until I've figured out which one works best. So again, it's that checklist thing is super useful. But I would say that it's not all then desk research. I think, by the way, people massively underestimate the power of desk research. But the other thing I will always do, and partly because this is much more entertaining, I will always go and look for the dark side. Because in my view, that is where you get a lot of your best planning insights. So, I mean, I always love this quote, human relationships are rich and they're messy and they're demanding. And that's what makes our jobs way more interesting than a kind of McKinsey type job where you literally can do it with an Excel spreadsheet. This is what makes it fun for me. But I fundamentally buy this quote, which is that true character is revealed by the choices a human being makes when they're under pressure. And the greater the pressure, the deeper the revelation. So actually you want to go for those moments of real tension and drama and pain and whatever else it might be, because those are very often where the best strategies lie. So yeah, the dark side is your friend. I like pain, tension, arguments, edges, comedy. All of those things are brilliant, brilliant sources of great planning insight. So I will go, one of the things I'll always do is go straight and look at, see, is there any good comedy being written about this subject area? Are there any series that cover it indirectly? Who else can I nick stuff from? And what can I do with a focus group or whatever it is to put people under pressure and actually see what comes out the other side of it. So nearly there, that's pretty much all my secrets in terms of actually kind of, you know, the things I'll go through. But the next bit of advice is very much one that I think all writers know about and use. I think as planners we're quite bad at, we circle round. It's a bit like a dog trying to go to sleep. They feel the need to sort of circle round 10 times before they actually lie down and get in their beds. And I think we're a little bit like that. So I have kind of trained myself, and it is hard, and I don't like this bit, of literally trying to vomit out my first draft. Trying to get something down on paper way before I'm actually comfortable that I've got an argument together. And it just sort of somehow, the act of writing it down gets rid of a load of crap, but also speeds up your thinking, because I think a lot of it's been mulling around in the background in your unconscious brain, and actually the act of writing it just forces quite a lot of that out. So I find that super, super helpful, and one of the really kind of key things to speed. So last one, and it's a slightly odd one, but I've read a lot recently about CEOs and some of the most effective businesses. The biggest thing that sets them apart is their ability to shut the door on stuff and move on. So it sounds a bit weird because the rest of it is all about the process of doing strategy. But actually, I think a lot of fast strategy is figuring out, okay, how am I going to draw this to a close? How am I actually going to find a way to shut the door on it and move on? Because again, I think we have this thing that we talk about quite a lot called faff tax, where we will actually call clients out on what we call faff tax. And that is, we just don't want to sit and do the dance for 18 months. The idea of getting one ad out in 18 months just makes me want to weep. So we definitely try and have a kind of point of view of, you know what, we're going to do this project super fast, we're going to be in and out, and you either like it or you don't, you like us and you don't, and that works. It's a good way for you to suck it and see, but also it puts a really great endpoint on stuff so that as a planner you can kind of move on to the next thing. And I think one of the things that I've sort of learned over the last however long is not to also get too emotionally attached to stuff, because I think one of the things that you do, particularly when you're operating at speed, you do make mistakes and you mess things up and you miss things. And I think one of the things I've got better and better at is not just sort of putting an endpoint on a project, but also putting an endpoint on a project emotionally and going to go, okay, I did the best I could in the time. That's it, that's done. I'm not going to think about it ever again unless I need to or I want to. And I think that is something not to be underestimated in terms of our industry, because I think we're quite hard on ourselves on that point. So that's it. That's my 7 points. And really, get on with it, which is what I'm going to do.